You're sitting across from someone you care about, and they're telling you a story about their day. Halfway through your response, they cut you off, not with anger, but with something that feels like concern. Wait, hold on, they say, leaning forward. Before you say anything else, I need to ask you something important. Your heart skips. You stop mid-sentence, and in that pause, something shifts. You forget what you were saying, you forget what you needed. The conversation is no longer yours. This moment, this small, seemingly insignificant interruption, is not an accident. It's architecture. It's the opening move in a game you didn't know you were playing. At its core, manipulation by a narcissist isn't about dramatic confrontations or obvious cruelty. It's about the slow, methodical rearranging of your reality. It's like watching a stage magician. You're so focused on the hand waving in front of you that you never see the other hand pocketing your watch. Narcissistic manipulation works because it doesn't announce itself. It hides in tone, timing, and the tiny emotional shifts that happen beneath your conscious awareness. Here's what makes it so insidious. Your brain is wired to trust patterns. Neuroscience shows us that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making and social behavior, relies heavily on predictability. When someone close to you behaves in ways that seem caring, concerned, or emotionally intelligent, your brain tags them as safe. It stops scanning for threats. This is an evolutionary survival mechanism. We needed to quickly identify allies in order to survive. But narcissists exploit this exact mechanism. They don't attack your logic. They attack your nervous system. They create confusion where there should be clarity and doubt where there should be certainty. What you're about to read isn't a list of insults or obvious red flags. These are the hidden maneuvers, 50 of them, that operate beneath your radar. Some will feel familiar. Others will make you pause and think, wait, is that what was happening? And that pause, that moment of recognition, is where your power begins. Because once you see the blueprint, the house can't hide its frame. 1. The premature interrupt. You're mid-sentence. You're explaining something that matters to you, a frustration at work, a memory, a hope. And just as you're reaching the emotional center of what you're trying to say, they interrupt. Not loudly, not rudely, just perfectly timed. Oh my God, that reminds me of when I... And suddenly the story is theirs. Your emotional momentum is gone. You're now listening, nodding, waiting for a gap to return to your point. But that gap never comes. Or if it does, the energy has shifted. What you were saying no longer feels important. It feels like a footnote. This is the premature interrupt, and it's not conversational enthusiasm. It's a calculated redirect. The narcissist isn't interested in what you're saying. They're interested in controlling the emotional real estate of the conversation. Imaging studies of narcissistic individuals show heightened activity in the brain's reward centers when they're the focus of attention. They experience a dopamine hit when the spotlight turns to them. So they've learned, often unconsciously, to yank that spotlight back the moment it drifts. Here's the deeper truth. Interruptions aren't just about stealing time. They're about training you. Each time you're cut off and you don't push back, your brain learns that your voice has less value in this dynamic. Over time, you begin to self-interrupt. You shorten your stories. You preemptively summarize. You stop sharing the details that matter because you've been conditioned to believe no one wants to hear them. The premature interrupt teaches you to shrink. And the cruelest part, if you ever call it out, you just interrupted me, they look confused, even hurt. I was just excited. I thought we were having a conversation. Now you're the problem. You're the one being difficult. You're the one who doesn't understand how normal dialogue works. What felt like a simple conversational hiccup is actually a masterclass in control. And you just learned the first rule: your narrative is always secondary to theirs. But what happens when they don't interrupt you at all? When they listen so intently it feels like love, only to use every word against you later. 2. The emotional loan shark. They help you when you need it most. They show up with groceries when you're sick. They lend you money without you asking. They offer their time, their care, their resources, and it feels like grace. It feels like you've finally found someone who sees you, who values you, who wants to ease your burden. You feel grateful, you feel seen, you feel indebted. And that's the hook. The emotional loan shark doesn't give to give. They give to own. Every act of kindness is a transaction recorded in a ledger you didn't know existed, and the interest rate is astronomical, because when they need something, your time, your compliance, your silence, they will cash in, and they won't ask politely, they'll remind you. After everything I've done for you, you can't even do this one thing. Suddenly that favor from 3 months ago isn't a gift. It's leverage. It's proof of your inadequacy, your ingratitude, your selfishness. The help they gave you becomes the weapon they use against you. And here's the psychological trap. Your brain does remember the help. The hippocampus, which governs memory, tends to encode emotionally significant events with extra weight. That moment when they showed up for you, it's stored vividly. So when they call in the debt, your brain cross-references that memory and floods you with guilt. You think they're right, they did help me, I should do this. But let's be clear, real generosity doesn't come with a receipt. Real support doesn't require repayment. The emotional loan shark isn't practicing kindness, they're practicing investment banking. They're buying shares in your guilt, your compliance, and your sense of obligation. And they'll keep buying until you're entirely owned. The most dangerous part, you'll start to self-enforce the debt. They won't even need to remind you. You'll remind yourself. You'll say yes to things that harm you because you're still paying off a kindness that should have been free. The emotional loan shark turns love into liability. But what if they don't remind you of what they've done? What if they erase it entirely and convince you that you're the one who's always taking? If this is resonating with you, if these tactics feel familiar, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and share this video with someone you love. Because the people closest to us often can't see what's happening to them. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is help someone else recognize the pattern. Knowledge isn't just power, it's protection. And protection is something we all deserve. 3. The rewritten history. You remember the fight. You remember it clearly. You said something vulnerable, and they responded with coldness, maybe even cruelty. You felt hurt. You retreated. The memory is vivid, their tone, their words, the look on their face. But when you bring it up weeks later, they furrow their brow, they tilt their head, they look at you like you've just said the sky is green. That's not what happened. They don't say it with anger. They say it with certainty, with confusion, with a tone that suggests you're the one misremembering. And then they offer their version, a version where you were the aggressor, where they were calm and reasonable, where your hurt was actually an overreaction to their trying to help. This is the rewritten history, and it's not a difference of perspective. It's a targeted assault on your memory, your reality, your trust in your own mind. The term gaslighting gets thrown around often, but this is its purest form. The narcissist doesn't just deny what happened, they construct an alternate narrative so confidently that your brain begins to question itself. And here's why it works. Human memory is not a video recording. It's reconstructive. Every time you recall a memory, your brain rebuilds it from fragments, and those fragments are susceptible to influence. When someone you trust presents a different version with absolute confidence, your prefrontal cortex tries to reconcile the discrepancy. And because their certainty is unwavering, while your memory has natural gaps, doubt creeps in. You think, maybe I am remembering it wrong, maybe I was too sensitive, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. Over time, the rewritten history doesn't just change one event, it changes your entire relationship with truth. You stop trusting your perceptions, you second-guess your emotions, you begin to rely on them to tell you what's real, and that's the goal. Because once you doubt your own memory, you can't trust your own judgment. And once you can't trust your judgment, you need them to navigate reality for you. The rewritten history doesn't just erase the past. It erases your authority over your own experience. But what if they don't rewrite the past? What if they poison the future by planting fears that never existed until they named them? 4. The preemptive accusation. You've been feeling something, a small, quiet unease. Maybe you've noticed they've been distant. Maybe they've been spending more time on their phone, more nights, working late, more weekends with friends you've never met. You haven't said anything yet. You're not even sure it's real. It's just a feeling. And then, out of nowhere, They look at you and say, "Are you cheating on me?" You freeze. The question is so absurd, so out of left field, that you almost laugh, but they're serious. Their eyes are searching yours, and suddenly you're the one defending yourself. You're the one explaining where you were, who you were with, why you didn't text back fast enough. The unease you were feeling about them, it's gone. Now you're scrambling to prove your innocence in a trial you didn't know was happening. This is the preemptive accusation, and it's a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The narcissist doesn't accuse you because they believe it. They accuse you to deflect asterisk. Research in projection theory, rooted in Freudian psychology but validated in modern clinical studies, shows that individuals with narcissistic traits often attribute their own undesirable behaviors or feelings to others. If they're lying, they accuse you of dishonesty. If they're unfaithful, they question your loyalty. If they're losing interest, they claim you're pulling away. And it works on two levels. First, it throws you off balance. You stop investigating your concerns and start defending yourself. Second, it creates a false equivalence. Even if you're not guilty, the accusation plants a seed. Now, in the back of your mind, there's a tiny voice asking, "Am I doing something wrong? Is there something I'm not seeing about myself?" The preemptive accusation flips the script. The person who should be answering questions is now asking them. And you, the person with legitimate concerns, are now on trial. It's not about truth. It's about territory. They're marking the boundaries of the conversation, ensuring that your doubts never get voiced, your questions never get asked, and your reality never gets validated. But what if they don't accuse you directly? What if they just ask innocent questions designed to make you prove yourself over and over until you're exhausted? 5. The innocent interrogation. They ask you a question. It's simple, straightforward. "Where were you today?" You answer, "I went to the gym, then grabbed coffee with Sarah." They nod, pause, then, "Which gym?" You tell them. Another pause, "What time did you leave?" You answer, though now there's a small knot forming in your stomach. "And Sarah, how long have you known her again?" This continues, question after question, each one delivered with a calm, neutral tone. There's no anger, no accusation, just curiosity, but it doesn't feel like curiosity. It feels like an interrogation. And the longer it goes on, the more defensive you become. You start volunteering extra details, preemptively explaining things they haven't even asked about, because the silence between their questions feels loaded. And here's the trap. If you get frustrated and say, "Why are you asking me all this?" they'll look hurt, confused. "I'm just asking, why are you being so defensive?" Now you're the problem. Your frustration, the very reaction they engineered, is used as proof that you're hiding something. This is the innocent interrogation, and it's designed to do one thing: make you prove your innocence in a crime that doesn't exist. The narcissist isn't asking because they want information. They're asking because they want control. Each question is a test. Each answer is scrutinized not for truth, but for signs of weakness, hesitation, or inconsistency. Neuroscience tells us that when the brain is under stress, particularly social or relational stress, the amygdala activates. This is the fear center. It triggers a fight-or-flight response. And when you're being questioned like a suspect, your amygdala reads the situation as a threat. Your heart rate increases. Your answers become faster, less precise. You start to stumble over details you'd normally recall easily. And that stumbling, the narcissist sees it, and they use it. You seem nervous. Are you sure that's what happened? The innocent interrogation doesn't seek truth. It manufactures doubt. It trains you to anticipate suspicion, to over-explain, to constantly prove yourself. And over time, you internalize this dynamic. You start editing your life in advance, avoiding people or places or activities that might trigger the questions. You shrink your world to fit inside the boundaries of what won't be interrogated. The questions aren't innocent, they're a cage. But what happens when the questions stop? When they go completely silent and leave you desperate to fill the void with answers they never asked for? The first 5 tactics have shown you how narcissists control the flow of conversation, rewrite reality, and make you question your own perceptions. But these are just the surface maneuvers. the opening gambits. In Section 2, we'll go deeper into the tactics that attack your sense of self-worth, your relationships, and your ability to trust anyone, including yourself. Because once they've destabilized your reality, the real manipulation begins. Stay with me, this is just the beginning. You've learned how they interrupt your voice, rewrite your memories, and turn simple questions into prosecutions. But those tactics were about controlling the immediate moment, the conversation in front of you, the story being told right now. What comes next is different. What comes next goes deeper. Because once a narcissist has destabilized your sense of what's real in the present, they begin to dismantle your sense of who you are entirely. They don't just want to win the argument. They want to rewire your identity. They want you to see yourself through their eyes, and their eyes see you as fundamentally flawed, perpetually insufficient, always one step away from being enough. This section is about the tactics that erode your self-worth so gradually you don't notice it's happening until you're standing in front of a mirror, wondering when you became so small. At its core, self-worth is built on two foundations: internal validation, how you see yourself, and external validation, how others reflect you back to yourself. In healthy relationships, external validation supports and affirms your internal sense of self. But narcissists understand something crucial. If they can control the external validation, if they can become the primary mirror through which you see yourself, they can reshape your internal landscape entirely. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-concept and identity, is heavily influenced by social feedback, especially from people we're emotionally bonded to. When someone you love consistently reflects back a distorted image of who you are, your brain begins to integrate that distortion as truth. It's not weakness, it's neurobiology. We are, in part, who we believe others see us as. And narcissists weaponize this. 6. The strategic silence. You said something, maybe it was important, maybe it was vulnerable, maybe it was just a normal part of your day that you wanted to share, and they don't respond. Not with anger, not with disagreement, they just go quiet. You wait, you check your phone, nothing, you send a follow-up, still nothing, hours pass, maybe a full day, and in that silence your mind begins to spiral. Did I say something wrong? Were they offended? Are they angry? Are they done with me? You replay the conversation, you analyze every word, you start drafting apologies for transgressions you can't even name, and by the time they finally respond with something casual, light, as if no time has passed at all, you're so relieved that you don't even bring up the silence. You just feel grateful they're talking to you again. This is the strategic silence, and it is one of the most potent psychological tools in the narcissist's arsenal. It's not about needing space or processing emotions. It's about creating anxiety, dependence, and compliance through absence. Here's what's happening in your brain. When someone we're attached to suddenly withdraws, the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain that processes social pain, lights up in the same way it does during physical pain. Studies using fMRI imaging show that social rejection activates the same neural pathways as a broken bone. The pain is real, and the narcissist knows this, either consciously or through learned behavior patterns. They've discovered that by withdrawing unpredictably, they can create a state of anxious attachment. Psychologist Edward Tronick's still-face experiment demonstrated this with infants. When a caregiver suddenly becomes unresponsive, the infant frantically tries to re-engage, becoming increasingly distressed. This isn't exclusive to infants. Adults experience the same panic when someone they're bonded to goes emotionally blank, and that panic makes you pliable. The strategic silence trains you to monitor their moods obsessively, to self-censor, to walk on eggshells. You learn that your peace is contingent on their presence, and their presence is contingent on your compliance. The silence isn't empty, it's full of control. But what if they don't just go silent? What if they're present, but every interaction leaves you feeling like you've failed a test you didn't know you were taking? 7. The impossible standard. You try, you genuinely try, you make dinner exactly the way they like it. You clean the house. You remember the small things, the brand of coffee they prefer, the way they fold their towels, the time they like to go to bed. And when they come home, they notice immediately, but not in the way you hoped. You forgot to wipe down the counters. Or this would have been better with fresh basil. Did we run out? Or worst of all, a small sigh, a brief look around, and then it's fine, thanks. The word fine lands like a stone because fine isn't good. Fine is the baseline. Fine is disappointment dressed in politeness. You did everything right, but somehow it's not enough. And the cruelest part, you can never figure out what enough actually is because the target moves. Every time you think you've hit it, it shifts just out of reach. This is the impossible standard, and it's not about high expectations. It's about ensuring you never feel successful, never feel secure, never feel like you've earned rest or approval. The psychology here is rooted in intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. B.F. Skinner's experiments with rats showed that unpredictable rewards create far stronger behavioral patterns than consistent ones. If you got praise every time you did something right, you'd eventually feel secure. But if praise comes randomly, sometimes for great effort, sometimes withheld even when you've done everything perfectly, you become obsessed with figuring out the pattern. You keep trying, keep performing, keep reaching for the approval that comes just rarely enough to keep you hooked. The narcissist doesn't want you to succeed. They want you to chase success, because a person who's constantly striving, constantly trying to prove themselves, is a person who's too busy to question the relationship itself. You're so focused on meeting the standard that you never stop to ask, why is the standard always just beyond my reach, and who benefits from me never quite getting there? The impossible standard isn't a challenge. It's a treadmill designed to keep you running in place. But what if they don't criticize your actions? What if they praise you in front of others, only to tear you down the moment you're alone? 8. The public pedestal, private poison. You're at dinner with friends, or a family gathering, or a work event, and the narcissist is charming, effusive. They put their hand on your shoulder and tell everyone how amazing you are. I'm so lucky, they're incredible, so talented, so thoughtful, so generous. People smile, you feel a warm flush of pride. This is the person you fell in love with. This is the version of them that makes everything else bearable. But then you're in the car or back home, the door closes and the mask drops. You know you embarrassed me tonight, right? The words hit like cold water, you blink, what, how? That story you told, the way you interrupted me, the way you laughed too loud. Suddenly, the evening you thought went well is being dissected, criticized, reframed as a series of failures. The person who praised you in public is now itemizing your flaws in private, and you're left dizzy, disoriented, unsure which version of reality is true. This is the public pedestal, private poison, and it serves a dual function. In public, the narcissist builds their image by association. By praising you, they look generous, supportive, secure. People see them as a loving partner, a proud spouse, a devoted friend. But in private, they reclaim power by tearing down the very person they elevated. The praise wasn't real, it was performance, and you were the prop. What makes this so psychologically damaging is the cognitive dissonance it creates. Cognitive dissonance occurs when your brain holds two conflicting beliefs simultaneously, and it generates intense psychological discomfort. You believe, they love me, they said beautiful things about me in front of people. But you also experience, they're cruel to me when we're alone. Your brain tries to reconcile this by blaming yourself. Maybe I did do something wrong. Maybe the private version is the truth, and the public version is just them being kind. Research by Leon Festinger on cognitive dissonance shows that people will often change their beliefs to align with their behaviors or circumstances rather than confront uncomfortable truths. So instead of concluding, this person is manipulative, you conclude, I need to be better, so the public version of them becomes the private version too. The public pedestal, private poison, ensures that even your victories are laced with doubt. You can't trust the praise. You can't trust the criticism. You can't trust anything except the feeling that you're constantly auditioning for a role you've already been cast in. But what happens when they don't just criticize you privately? What if they turn your own vulnerabilities into punchlines? 9. The weaponized vulnerability. You told them something true, something that scared you to say out loud. Maybe it was about your past, a trauma, a failure, a shame you've carried for years. Maybe it was about your body, your fears, your insecurities. You trusted them with it. You laid it down between you like an offering. And in that moment, they held it gently. They said the right things. Thank you for telling me. I'm here. I understand. You felt seen. You felt safe. And then, weeks or months later, you're in an argument. Voices are raised. Emotions are high. And they reach into their arsenal and pull out the exact thing you trusted them with. Well, maybe if you weren't so damaged from your childhood, you'd be able to handle this like an adult. Or no wonder you're insecure. Look at you. The words don't just hurt, they shatter, because this wasn't just an insult. This was a betrayal. This was the thing you gave them in trust, now turned into a weapon and used against you. This is weaponized vulnerability, and it is among the most devastating tactics because it doesn't just attack you in the present, it retroactively poisons the past. Every moment of intimacy you shared now feels like reconnaissance. Every time you opened up now feels like you handed them ammunition. The neuroscience of trust shows that when we share vulnerable information, the brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. This is why confession, therapy, and intimate conversation feel so connecting. But when that vulnerability is later used against us, the brain experiences what researchers call betrayal trauma. The hippocampus, which stores emotional memories, flags the experience of opening up as dangerous asterisk. Over time, this creates a conditioned response. Vulnerability equals pain. And here's the long-term damage. You stop sharing, not just with them, but with everyone. You learn that the cost of being known is too high. You build walls not just around your heart, but around your story. The narcissist doesn't just hurt you in the moment, they alter your capacity for intimacy in every future relationship. Weaponized vulnerability doesn't just wound. It teaches you that the safest version of yourself is the hidden one. But what if they don't use your past against you? What if they recruit others to validate their version of you, making you feel like the whole world sees you as broken? 10. The triangulated verdict. You're having a disagreement. You're trying to explain your perspective, your feelings, why something they did hurt you. And instead of engaging with you directly, they say, I talked to mutual friends/family members/therapist, and they agree with me. They said you're overreacting. Or everyone thinks you're being unreasonable. I'm not the only one. Suddenly, it's not just the two of you anymore. There's an invisible jury, and they've apparently already reached a verdict. You're outnumbered, you're wrong, and it's not just their opinion, it's consensus. You feel small, confused, ganged up on, and the worst part, you start to wonder if they're right. If everyone else sees it this way, maybe you are the problem. This is the triangulated verdict, and it's a form of social manipulation that leverages the human need for belonging and validation. The narcissist brings third parties into the conflict, sometimes real, sometimes fabricated, to create the illusion of objectivity and consensus. Here's the psychological mechanism. Humans are deeply influenced by social proof. Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments in the 1950s showed that people will deny the evidence of their own eyes if everyone around them presents a different reality. Participants would claim that two lines of obviously different lengths were the same, simply because the group said so. We are wired to trust the majority, even when the majority is wrong. The narcissist exploits this by positioning themselves as the spokesperson for a collective. But here's what you don't know. The third parties they're citing may not have said what they claim, or the narcissist presented such a skewed version of events that of course the third party agreed. Or the third party is another person the narcissist has manipulated. You're not getting an objective perspective, you're getting an echo chamber designed to make you doubt yourself. And even if you try to verify, can I talk to them myself? The narcissist will shut it down. I don't want to drag them into this, it's between us. But it's not between you, they already dragged others in, they just don't want you to discover that the verdict they cited doesn't exist. The triangulated verdict isolates you while making you feel like the entire world is watching and judging. It turns a two-person conflict into a public trial where you're the defendant, and the evidence is hearsay you're not allowed to challenge. But what if they don't need other people to make you feel outnumbered? What if they become multiple versions of themselves, and you never know which one you're going to face? You've now seen how narcissists use silence, impossible standards, public performance, weaponized intimacy, and social manipulation to erode your sense of self. But we're only at tactic 10. The tactics ahead go even deeper, into the ways they isolate you from others, rewrite the rules of reality itself, and ensure that leaving feels more dangerous than staying. In Section 3, we'll explore how they turn your relationships, your resources, and even your own mind into tools of control. This is where the architecture becomes a labyrinth. Stay with me. You've seen how they control conversations, destabilize your memory, and erode your self-worth. You've watched them turn your vulnerabilities into weapons and recruit phantom audiences to validate their version of reality. But all of those tactics, as painful as they are, still operate within the relationship itself, between you and them, in the private theater of your shared life. What comes next is different. What comes next is about severing your connections to the outside world. Because a narcissist understands something fundamental, you are most controllable when you are most isolated. As long as you have other people, friends who know you, family who remembers who you used to be, colleagues who see your competence, communities that validate your worth, you have mirrors that reflect a different image than the one the narcissist is showing you. You have escape routes. You have reality checks. And they can't allow that. At its core, isolation isn't about physical distance. It's about perceptual distance. It's about creating a gap between you and everyone else, a gap filled with suspicion, shame, and the creeping belief that no one else could possibly understand what you're going through. The narcissist doesn't need to lock you in a room. They just need to make every other room feel less safe than the one you're already in. Social neuroscience shows us that human beings regulate their nervous systems through connection. The polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, demonstrates that our sense of safety is largely determined by social engagement, eye contact, tone of voice, the felt sense of being with someone who sees us. When those connections are severed or poisoned, the nervous system shifts into a chronic state of threat. And when you're in threat mode, your world contracts. You stop reaching out. You stop trusting. You make yourself smaller and smaller until the narcissist is the only landmark left in your landscape. This section is about how they make that happen, how they turn your support system into a source of anxiety, how they reframe love as surveillance, how they make you complicit in your own isolation. 11. The poison drip. They don't forbid you from seeing your friends. They're not that obvious. In fact, they might even encourage it. You should call them. You should make plans. I want you to have your own life. But then, after you spend time with a friend, you come home feeling light, energized. You had a good conversation. You laughed. You remembered what it feels like to be yourself without monitoring every word. And they ask, casual, almost idle, so how was it? You tell them, and as you talk, you notice their expression. It's subtle, a tightness around the mouth, a distant look in their eyes, a tone that's just slightly off. That's great, I'm glad you had fun. But it doesn't sound glad, it sounds like a door closing. Later that night, or maybe the next day, they're quieter than usual. When you ask what's wrong, they sigh, nothing, I don't know, I guess I feel like you have more fun with them than you do with me. Your stomach drops, you rush to reassure them. That's not true, I love spending time with you. I know, I'm being stupid, forget I said anything. But you don't forget, and the next time your friend texts to make plans, you hesitate. You think about that sigh, that look, that quiet withdrawal, and you find an excuse to decline. Or you go, but you cut it short. Or you go, but the whole time you're checking your phone, worried about what mood you'll come home to. This is the poison drip, and it's insidious because it never announces itself as control. It masquerades as vulnerability, as insecurity, as a need for reassurance. But the effect is the same. Your relationships outside the narcissist become sources of guilt and anxiety instead of joy and support. Here's the mechanism. The narcissist pairs your external connections with emotional consequences. Behaviorally, this is classical conditioning, the same process Pavlov used with dogs and bells. Every time you spend time away from them, you return to some form of punishment, withdrawal, sadness, passive-aggressive comments, or even just a subtle shift in warmth. Your brain begins to associate time with others with relational threat. Over time, the conditioning becomes internal. You don't need them to say anything. You've internalized the pattern. And the most damaging part, you start to blame your friends for causing the tension. If I didn't see them, things would be peaceful. Maybe I'm spending too much time away. Maybe I'm being selfish. The poison drip doesn't cut the ropes tying you to other people. It makes you pick up the scissors yourself. But what if they don't make you feel guilty for leaving? What if they come with you and turn every outing into a performance where you're the supporting actor? 12. The spotlight hijack. You're at a party, or a family dinner, or a work event. You brought the narcissist along because it felt important, because you wanted them there, because you thought it would be nice to share this part of your life with them. And at first it is. They're charming, they're engaging, people are laughing at their stories, they're the center of attention, and you feel proud, relieved, you're not even sure. But as the night goes on, you start to notice something. Every conversation you start, they enter and redirect. Every story you begin, they finish or interrupt with their own. When someone asks you a question, they answer before you can. When you're introduced to someone new, they immediately launch into a monologue about themselves, and you become background scenery in your own social circle. By the end of the night, people remember them. They barely remember you was there. And on the drive home, if you mention it, if you say gently, I felt like I couldn't really talk, look baffled. What are you talking about? Everyone loved you. I was bragging about you all night. But they weren't bragging about you. They were using you as a prop in their performance. Your achievements became their anecdotes. Your friends became their audience. This is the spotlight hijack, and it accomplishes two things. First, it ensures that your social capital, your relationships, your reputation, your presence is funneled through them. People remember you in relation to them, not as yourself. Second, it makes you reluctant to bring them into your world again, because it's exhausting, because you feel erased. So you start going to things alone, which isolates you further, or you stop going altogether, which isolates you completely. The psychology here is about social identity. In healthy relationships, partners enhance each other's social presence, but narcissists operate on a zero-sum model. Attention is a limited resource, and every bit you receive is a bit they lose. Neuroscientific research on narcissistic personality patterns shows hyperactivity in the brain's reward centers, specifically in response to social admiration. They're not just seeking attention, they're addicted to it. Unlike any addict, they'll do whatever it takes to get their fix, even if it means draining yours. The spotlight hijack doesn't just steal your moment, it trains you to stop seeking moments altogether. But what if they don't steal the spotlight? What if they convince you that the people in the spotlight are actually threats you need to be protected from? 13. The protective paranoia. They care about you, they really do, at least that's what they say, and they're worried about your friend from college who always seems to need something from you, worried about your coworker who seems a little too interested in your personal life, worried about your sibling who has always been jealous of you. At first, it sounds like concern, like someone who has your best interests at heart. I just don't trust them. I don't think they value you the way they should. You defend the person. You explain the history, the context, the reasons you trust them. And the narcissist nods, conciliatory. You're right, I'm sure it's fine. I just worry about you. But the seed has been planted, and over time they water it. A comment here, a raised eyebrow there, a carefully timed question. Did they ever apologize for that thing they did last year, even if there was no thing, even if the question itself is creating the doubt? Eventually, you start to see your relationships through their lens. You start to notice things that maybe aren't there. You become suspicious of people who have never given you reason to be. And slowly, quietly, you pull away from them, not because they hurt you, but because the narcissist convinced you they might. This is the protective paranoia, and it's one of the most effective isolation tactics because it frames control as care. The narcissist isn't jealous or possessive, they're just looking out for you. They're the only one who really sees the threats around you. They're the only one you can trust. The psychological impact is profound. When someone we're bonded to repeatedly highlights potential dangers in our other relationships, it activates the brain's threat detection systems. The amygdala, which governs fear responses, becomes sensitized to those relationships. What was once comfortable becomes tinged with anxiety. And here's the insidious part. If you distance yourself from those people and nothing bad happens, the narcissist gets credit for protecting you. If you distance yourself and you feel lonely, well, that just proves you need them more. Research on coercive control, particularly the work of Dr. Evan Stark, identifies this pattern as structural isolation. It's not about physical barriers. It's about manipulating your perception of safety until the only safe harbor is the person who's actually the storm. The protective paranoia doesn't warn you of real danger. It creates danger where there was none, then offers itself as the only shelter. But what if they don't isolate you from people? What if they isolate you from the resources that give you independence and choice? 14. The velvet trap. They offer to help, and honestly, you need the help. Maybe you're between jobs, maybe you're going back to school, maybe you're dealing with a health issue or a financial setback, and they step in with open hands. Let me cover rent this month. Don't worry about the bills, I've got it. Why don't you quit that job you hate? I make enough for both of us. It feels like love, like partnership, like someone finally has your back. And at first, it is. There's no strings, no ledger, no resentment. You feel grateful, you feel supported. You feel like maybe, finally, you can breathe. But then something shifts. You express an opinion they don't like. You make a choice they don't agree with. And suddenly, the help becomes a weapon. I pay for everything, and this is how you treat me. Or more subtly, I just think it's interesting that you feel so strongly about this, considering I'm the one keeping us afloat. The help wasn't help, it was investment, and now they're cashing in. This is the velvet trap, and it's financial control disguised as generosity. The narcissist doesn't want to support you, they want to make you dependent, because dependence equals power. As long as you need their money, their resources, their financial stability, you can't leave. Or more accurately, you feel like you can't leave. The economics of abusive relationships are well documented. Studies show that financial dependence is one of the strongest predictors of whether someone stays in a harmful relationship. It's not about love or loyalty, it's about survival. If leaving means homelessness, poverty, or losing custody of your children because you can't afford a lawyer, leaving stops being a viable option. And the narcissist knows this. They may not consciously strategize it, but they've learned that money is leverage. So they create situations where you need them financially, then use that need to control your behavior, your choices, your autonomy. They might insist on joint accounts, but maintain sole control over them. They might discourage you from working or sabotage your job opportunities. They might make large purchases without consulting you, then blame you for financial stress. The velvet trap feels soft on the way in, but by the time you realize it's a trap, the walls have already closed. But what if they don't control your money? What if they control something even more fundamental? Your sense of what's real and what's possible. 15. The gaslighting escalation. You know something happened, you were there, you saw it, you heard it, the memory is clear. But they say it didn't happen. And this time, they don't just deny it. They build an entire counter-narrative so detailed, so confident, so internally consistent that you start to feel like you're losing your mind. That never happened, you're thinking of a different night. I wasn't even home when you say this happened. You've been so stressed lately, I think you're mixing things up. At first you push back, you insist, you point to evidence, but they have an explanation for everything. And their explanations are delivered with such calm certainty that your own memories start to feel unstable, like maybe you did mix things up, maybe you are stressed, maybe your brain is playing tricks on you. And then it escalates. They start questioning other memories, other perceptions. You said we had plans tonight. We never talked about that. You're remembering our conversation completely wrong. I never said that. Why would I say that? Over time, you stop trusting yourself. You start recording conversations, taking screenshots, writing things down, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that you're not going crazy. This is the gaslighting escalation, and it's different from the earlier rewritten history because it's not about a single event. It's systematic. It's relentless. It's designed to make you doubt your entire relationship with reality. The term gaslighting comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband manipulates his wife into believing she's losing her sanity by denying observable events and insisting she's imagining things. But the clinical understanding goes deeper. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse that targets epistemological security, your ability to trust your own knowledge and perception. Dr. Robin Stern, author of The Gaslight Effect, identifies 3 stages: disbelief, you argue back; defense, you try to prove you're right; and depression, you give up and accept their version. By the time you reach the 3rd stage, you've internalized the idea that your perception is fundamentally unreliable. And once you believe that, the narcissist becomes your interpreter of reality. They tell you what happened, what was said, what it meant. And you believe them because you no longer trust yourself. Neurologically, chronic gaslighting can actually impair cognitive function. The constant stress of reality distortion keeps the brain in a state of hypervigilance, which floods the system with cortisol. Over time, elevated cortisol impairs memory consolidation in the hippocampus. So the very act of being gaslit makes your memory less reliable, which makes the gaslighting more effective. It's a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. The gaslighting escalation doesn't just rewrite the past. It rewrites your capacity to know anything for certain. But what happens when they don't just deny what you remember? What if they convince you that your emotions themselves are evidence of your dysfunction? You've now witnessed how narcissists isolate you from friends, hijack your social presence, weaponize financial dependence, and systematically dismantle your trust in your own perception. These aren't just cruel behaviors. They're strategic maneuvers designed to make you smaller, quieter, and more controllable. In Section 4, we'll examine the tactics that target your emotions directly, turning your feelings into proof of your inadequacy, your reactions into crimes, and your pain into performance. The architecture is no longer just around you. It's inside you, and that's where the deepest damage lies. You've watched them isolate you from others, control your resources, and convince you that your memory can't be trusted. But all of those tactics, devastating as they are, still operate in the external world, the world of people, money, events, and verifiable facts. What comes next is more insidious. What comes next targets the interior landscape, your emotions, your reactions, the way you feel about what you feel. Because here's what the narcissist understands. If they can convince you that your emotions are the problem, that your hurt is oversensitivity, your anger is irrationality, your sadness is manipulation, then they never have to take responsibility for the things they do. Your feelings become character flaws. Your pain becomes proof of your defectiveness. And every time you express a legitimate grievance, you're not revealing their wrongdoing, you're revealing your weakness. This is emotional invalidation at its most surgical, and it works because human beings need their emotions validated in order to trust them. Developmental psychology shows us that children learn to regulate emotions through co-regulation with caregivers. When a child is upset and a caregiver says, "I see that you're sad, and that makes sense," the child learns that their internal experience is real and manageable. But when a caregiver says, "Stop crying, it's not that bad," the child learns that their internal experience is wrong, excessive, shameful. Narcissists recreate this dynamic in adult relationships. They become the arbiter of which emotions are acceptable and which are evidence of dysfunction. And because you're bonded to them, because you want their approval, because the human nervous system seeks validation from attachment figures, you begin to police your own emotions. You suppress what you feel. You apologize for feeling it. You perform emotional normalcy even when you're falling apart inside. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for emotional regulation, requires a sense of safety to function optimally. When you're constantly told that your emotions are wrong, your nervous system interprets this as rejection, which activates the amygdala and triggers a stress response. You're not just sad or angry anymore, you're sad about being sad, anxious about being anxious, ashamed of your own internal life. This section is about how narcissists weaponize your feelings against you, how they turn your emotional honesty into a liability, how they make you the problem in every scenario, no matter what they've done. Tactic 16, the emotional audit. You're upset, something they did hurt you, maybe they cancelled plans last minute, maybe they said something dismissive, maybe they forgot something that mattered to you. And you tell them, you're not yelling, you're not attacking, you're just being honest about how you feel. When you did that, it hurt me. And instead of acknowledging it, instead of apologizing or even just listening, they tilt their head, they cross their arms, and they audit your emotion like an accountant reviewing a suspicious expense report. Why does that hurt you, though? That seems like a disproportionate reaction. I don't think that's about me. I think that's about your insecurity. You're allowed to feel however you want, but I'm just saying most people wouldn't be upset about this. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about what they did. It's about whether you have the right to feel what you feel. And the answer, according to them, is no. Your hurt is irrational. Your disappointment is an overreaction. Your sadness is you being too sensitive. This is the emotional audit, and it's designed to do one thing: make you defend your emotions instead of expressing them. Because if you're busy justifying why you're hurt, you're not addressing the behavior that hurt you. The psychology here is rooted in invalidation. Dr. Marsha Linehan, creator of dialectical behavior therapy, identifies emotional invalidation as one of the most damaging relational patterns. When someone consistently tells you that your emotions don't make sense, your brain begins to distrust its own signals. The insula, the part of the brain that processes internal bodily states and emotional awareness, starts to receive conflicting information. Your body says, "This hurts," but the person you trust says, "No, it doesn't." Over time, you lose access to your own emotional compass. And here's the cruelest part. The narcissist will often frame this audit as helping you. "I'm just trying to understand. I want to help you see this more clearly." But they're not helping. They're teaching you that your emotional truth is always up for debate, that your pain requires their approval to be valid. The emotional audit doesn't examine your feelings, it prosecutes them. But what if they don't just question whether your feelings are valid? What if they convince you that having feelings at all is a form of violence against them? 17. The reverse victim. You finally confront them. You've been holding it in for days, weeks, maybe months, but you can't anymore. You sit them down and you say it. "What you did hurt me. I need you to understand that." And for a moment, they're quiet. They look down. You think maybe finally they're hearing you. And then they start to cry. Not small tears, full shaking sobs. And suddenly you're the one comforting them. You're the one apologizing. You're the one saying, it's okay, even though nothing is okay. "I can't believe I hurt you," they say through tears. "I'm such a terrible person. You deserve so much better. I don't know why you even stay with me." And now you're not processing your hurt, you're managing their crisis. You're reassuring them that they're not terrible, that you're not leaving, that it's not that bad. By the end of the conversation, you haven't received an apology. You haven't received acknowledgement. You've given comfort to the person who hurt you, and somehow, you're the one feeling guilty for bringing it up. This is the reverse victim, and it's one of the most disorienting tactics in the narcissist's playbook. The moment you express pain, they become the wounded party. Your hurt becomes the weapon you used against them, and you become the perpetrator of emotional violence simply by numbing your experience. The term for this is DARVO, coined by psychologist Jennifer Freyd: deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. The narcissist denies wrongdoing, attacks your credibility or your emotional stability, and then flips the script so that they are the victim and you are the abuser. It's a defensive maneuver so effective that it short-circuits accountability entirely. Neuroscientifically, this exploits your empathy. Mirror neurons, the brain cells that allow us to feel what others feel, activate when we see someone in distress. When the narcissist performs emotional collapse, your brain responds with caregiving impulses. You're neurologically wired to soothe suffering, and they know this. They've learned that emotional distress is currency, and they spend it whenever they need to redirect attention from their behavior to their feelings. The reverse victim doesn't just avoid accountability, it makes you afraid to ever ask for it again. But what if they don't perform collapse? What if they perform rage so intense that you learn to never speak up at all? 18. The disproportionate explosion. You mention something small, maybe it's a request. Could you pick up milk on your way home? Maybe it's a gentle critique. When you said that earlier, it sounded a little harsh. Maybe it's just a clarification. I thought we agreed to leave at 6, not 7. And they detonate. Not a raised voice, a full volcanic eruption, shouting, slamming doors, maybe throwing something. Their face is red. Their body language is aggressive. And the words coming out of their mouth are so far beyond the scale of what you said that you're frozen, unable to comprehend how you got here. I can't do anything right. Everything I do is wrong. I'm sick of walking on eggshells around you. You're stunned. You weren't walking on eggshells. They are. You weren't attacking them. You asked about milk. But now you're apologizing, backtracking, trying to de-escalate, trying to calm the storm you didn't create. And later, after they've calmed down, after the adrenaline has faded, they might apologize, or they might act like nothing happened. Either way, the lesson is learned. Bringing up even the smallest issue can trigger an explosion. So you stop bringing things up. You swallow your requests. You endure the small hurts because they're easier than the blast radius of speaking. This is the disproportionate explosion, and it's not about anger management. It's about control through intimidation. The narcissist has learned that overwhelming emotional force shuts down conversation, shuts down critique, and trains you into silence. The neuroscience of fear conditioning explains why this works so effectively. When you experience something frightening, like sudden, intense rage, your amygdala encodes that memory with a threat marker. The next time you're in a similar situation, wanting to make a request, needing to set a boundary, your brain retrieves that threat marker and floods your system with anxiety. You might not even consciously remember the explosion, but your body does. Your heart rate increases. Your palms sweat. And you choose silence, because silence feels safer than triggering another detonation. Research on intimate partner violence, even when it's not physical, shows that the unpredictability of explosions is what makes them so controlling. If the narcissist exploded every time, you'd learn to avoid specific triggers. But because the explosions are random, sometimes milk is fine, sometimes it's a catastrophe, you can never predict what's safe. So you just stop trying. You stop asking for anything. You make yourself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The disproportionate explosion doesn't teach you what not to say. It teaches you not to speak. But what if they don't need to explode? What if they've trained you so well that you now perform their anger for them, attacking yourself before they ever have to? 19. The preemptive self-punishment. You made a mistake, a real one this time. You forgot to do something you said you'd do. You were late. You said something in a moment of frustration that you regret. And before they can even respond, you're already in full self-flagellation mode. I'm so sorry, I'm an idiot, I don't know what's wrong with me, I'm the worst. You deserve better, I'll fix it. I promise, please don't be mad. You're apologizing not just for what you did, but for existing. You're preemptively punishing yourself because you've learned that their disappointment is unbearable. You've learned that the only way to avoid their judgment is to judge yourself first and harshly. And here's the thing, they don't stop you. They don't say, hey, it's okay, everyone makes mistakes. They let you spiral. They watch. Maybe they even nod slowly, as if your self-immolation is appropriate, as if this level of shame is what you deserve. This is preemptive self-punishment, and it's the clearest sign that you've internalized the narcissist's voice. You no longer need them to criticize you, you do it for them. You've become your own warden. The psychological term for this is introjection, the process by which you absorb external criticism and make it part of your internal dialogue. When someone repeatedly tells you that you're inadequate, careless, disappointing, your brain begins to encode those messages as self-beliefs. The critical voice that used to come from outside now comes from inside. And it's often harsher than anything they would actually say, because you're trying to preempt their criticism by making yours more severe. Dr. John Bowlby's attachment theory shows us that children who grow up with critical or emotionally unavailable caregivers develop what's called an insecure attachment style, often characterized by excessive self-blame and hypervigilance to others' emotional states. Adult relationships with narcissists recreate this dynamic. You become hypervigilant to their moods, their needs, their disappointments, and you become hypercritical of yourself to avoid triggering their disapproval. But here's what's most damaging. This pattern doesn't just affect your relationship with them, it affects your relationship with yourself. Even in moments when they're not around, even in situations that have nothing to do with them, you hear their voice in your head. You apologize for taking up space. You minimize your needs. You punish yourself for being human. Preemptive self-punishment means you've outsourced your self-worth to someone who has no interest in protecting it. But what if they don't even need you to punish yourself? What if they've made you so confused about what's real that you can't tell the difference between self-protection and self-sabotage? 20. The manufactured confusion. You ask a direct question, a simple one. Are we still going to your parents' house on Sunday? And they respond, but the response doesn't actually answer the question. Why are you asking me that? I thought we talked about this. Do you not want to go? You try again. I just want to confirm the plan. The plan is whatever you want it to be. I'm flexible. But you know from experience that flexible doesn't mean flexible. It means if you choose wrong, there will be consequences. So you press for clarity. I need to know if we're going or not, so I can plan my day. And now they're frustrated. Why are you making this so complicated? It's not that serious. But you didn't make it complicated. You asked a yes or no question, and 20 minutes later, you still don't have an answer. You're exhausted, you're confused, and you still don't know if you're going to their parents' house on Sunday. This is manufactured confusion, and it's a tactic designed to keep you in a perpetual state of uncertainty. The narcissist doesn't give you straight answers because straight answers give you power. If you know the plan, you can make decisions. If you can make decisions, you have agency, and they can't allow that. The psychology here involves what's called cognitive load. When your brain has to work overtime to extract basic information from someone, it depletes your mental resources. You become fatigued, irritable, and more susceptible to going along with whatever they eventually decide, just to end the confusion. Research on decision fatigue shows that when people are mentally exhausted, they default to the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is usually compliance. But there's a deeper layer. Manufactured confusion keeps you in a state of chronic anxiety. When you can't get clear answers to basic questions, your nervous system can't settle. You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always scanning for clues, always trying to read between the lines. And that vigilance is exhausting. Over time, it wears down your capacity for independent thought. You stop trusting your own logic because theirs is so convoluted that you assume you must be missing something. The neuroscience of chronic stress shows that prolonged activation of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, actually shrinks the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning. So the more confused you are, the harder it becomes to think clearly, which makes you more dependent on them to interpret reality for you. Manufactured confusion doesn't just withhold information. It weaponizes ambiguity until you're too tired to ask questions anymore. But what happens when they stop confusing you with words and start using silence? Not the strategic silence you saw earlier, but something darker, something that makes you feel like you've ceased to exist entirely. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a video, you're doing the hard work of seeing what's been invisible, and that takes courage. So right now, I want you to pause and do something for yourself and for others. Subscribe to this channel, like this video. And most importantly, share it. Send it to someone who might be living in this confusion. Send it to someone who's been apologizing for existing. Send it to someone who's forgotten what their own voice sounds like. Because these tactics survive in isolation and secrecy, the moment we name them, the moment we recognize them together, they start to lose their grip. You're not alone in this, and neither is the person you're thinking of right now. Share this with them. It might be the lifeline they didn't know they needed. You've now seen how narcissists turn your emotions into evidence of your dysfunction, your pain into proof of your sensitivity, and your need for clarity into a character flaw. But we're only at tactic 20. The next section goes even deeper, into the ways they control your identity itself, turning who you are into who they need you to be, and making you forget that you were ever anyone else. In Section 5, we'll examine how they rewrite not just your past, but your future, your potential, and your sense of what's possible. The cage isn't made of bars, it's made of beliefs, and those are the hardest to escape. You've watched them invalidate your emotions, reverse victim and offender, manufacture confusion, and train you to punish yourself. Those tactics dismantled your trust in your feelings, your perceptions, your right to take up space. But what comes next is even more totalizing. What comes next is about identity itself. Because the narcissist doesn't just want to control what you do or what you feel. They want to control who you are. They want to author the story of your life, your capabilities, your worth, your potential, your future. They want you to see yourself exclusively through their eyes. And once you do, once their narrative becomes your identity, you don't need to be controlled anymore. You control yourself on their behalf. This is perhaps the most insidious achievement of narcissistic manipulation, the colonization of the self. It's not enough to doubt your memories or suppress your emotions. Now you doubt your competence, your intelligence, your lovability, your right to want more than what you have. You begin to believe that who you are is fundamentally limited, fundamentally flawed, and that without them, you would be lost. At its core, identity is a story we tell ourselves about ourselves. Narrative psychology, pioneered by researchers like Dan McAdams, shows that human beings construct their sense of self through autobiographical narratives. We remember our past, interpret our present, and imagine our future through stories. And here's what makes this vulnerable to manipulation. Those stories are co-created. We don't form our identities in isolation. We form them in relationship, through the reflections we see in other people's eyes. In healthy relationships, people reflect back your complexity, your growth, your multifaceted humanity, but narcissists reflect back a curated version of you, one that serves their needs. They highlight your flaws and downplay your strengths. They remember your failures and forget your successes. They predict your limitations and dismiss your possibilities. And over time, that reflection becomes the mirror you use to see yourself. The prefrontal cortex, which governs self-concept and future planning, is heavily influenced by social feedback. When the person you're closest to consistently tells you who you are, explicitly or implicitly, your brain integrates that information into your self-schema. It's not gullibility, it's neurobiology. We are, in part, who we believe important others believe us to be. This section is about how narcissists rewrite your identity, how they shrink your sense of what's possible, how they make you forget who you were before them, and convince you that who you are now is all you'll ever be. 21. The dream deferral. You tell them about something you want, not a small thing, a real dream. Maybe you want to go back to school, maybe you want to start a business, maybe you want to travel, write a book, change careers, learn an instrument, something that lights you up when you talk about it. And they listen, they nod, and then they say, "That sounds amazing, but maybe wait until things are more stable." Or, "I love that idea. Let's revisit it when we're in a better place financially." Or, "You should definitely do that, just not right now. The timing isn't right." It sounds reasonable. It sounds supportive, even, and you agree. You defer the dream. You tell yourself, "They're right, now isn't the time." But here's what happens. The right time never comes. There's always a reason. Always something more pressing, more practical, more immediate. And slowly, imperceptibly, the dream fades from a plan to a someday to a remember when I used to think about doing that. This is the dream deferral, and it's not about practical timing. It's about keeping you from becoming a version of yourself that might outgrow them, might not need them, might realize you're capable of more than they've told you you are. The psychology here is rooted in what's called learned helplessness, a concept developed by psychologist Martin Seligman. When people are repeatedly prevented from pursuing goals or making changes, they eventually stop trying. They internalize the belief that their actions don't matter, that external circumstances will always override their efforts. The narcissist doesn't have to forbid your dreams, they just have to delay them until you forget you ever had them. And here's the neuroscience. Dopamine, the brain's motivation chemical, is released not just when we achieve goals, but when we anticipate achieving them. When you're actively working towards something, your brain rewards you with dopamine, which fuels continued effort. But when goals are perpetually deferred, when they exist only in the abstract future, dopamine pathways weaken. The dream stops feeling real. It stops feeling possible. Eventually, it stops feeling like yours. The dream deferral doesn't kill your aspirations outright. It starves them slowly until they die of neglect. But what if they don't just defer your dreams? What if they convince you that you're fundamentally incapable of achieving them? 22. The competence erosion. You used to be good at things, you remember this. You were competent at your job, you could manage your finances, you knew how to navigate social situations, make decisions, solve problems. You weren't perfect, but you were functional, you were capable. But now, with them, you're constantly making mistakes, forgetting things, misunderstanding instructions, getting things wrong. And they're always there to catch you. You forgot to pay that bill again. I told you to take the second left, not the third. No, that's not how you do it. Here, let me. At first, you're grateful for the help, but over time, you start to notice something. You only seem to make mistakes around them. Or rather, things only seem to be mistakes when they're watching. You do the same tasks at work, with friends, alone, and they're fine. But under their gaze, everything becomes evidence of your incompetence. And the more they point out your errors, the more you make them. Because now you're anxious. Now you're second-guessing. Now your hands are shaking as you try to do something simple because you know they're watching and you know they're waiting for you to mess up. This is competence erosion, and it's a systematic process of convincing you that you can't function without them. The narcissist becomes the expert, the capable one, the person who has to constantly compensate for your inadequacy. And you become dependent, not because you actually are incompetent, but because they've created an environment where competence is impossible. The psychological mechanism is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Research by Robert Rosenthal on the Pygmalion effect showed that when teachers expected students to perform poorly, those students actually did perform more poorly, not because of ability, but because expectations shaped interactions. The narcissist's constant surveillance and criticism creates performance anxiety, and performance anxiety impairs executive function. Neuroscientifically, when you're being watched critically, your brain activates the same threat detection systems it would during a predator encounter. The amygdala fires, cortisol floods your system, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for complex problem-solving and decision-making, goes partially offline. You literally can't think as clearly when you're in a state of threat, so you make mistakes you wouldn't normally make, and those mistakes become proof that you need them. Over time, you stop trusting your own judgment entirely. You defer to them on everything, not because they're always right, but because you've come to believe you're always wrong. Competence erosion doesn't reveal your inadequacy, it manufactures it. But what if they don't just erode your competence? What if they rewrite your history so thoroughly that you forget you ever were competent, capable, or whole? Tactic 23. The identity rewrite. They tell you who you were before you met them, and it's not the version you remember. You were so lost when I met you. You didn't know what you wanted. You were struggling, I helped you get your life together. You pause, you try to remember, were you lost? You had just finished graduate school, you had friends, hobbies, a job you liked. You weren't perfect, but you weren't drowning. But they seem so certain, and they tell the story with such detail, such conviction, that you start to doubt your own recollection. Maybe you are more of a mess than you remember. Maybe you're just romanticizing the past. Maybe you do owe them for saving you from a crisis that you're not sure actually existed. This is the identity rewrite, and it's one of the most profound forms of manipulation because it doesn't just change how you see yourself now, it changes how you see yourself then. It erases the person you were before them, replacing that person with a fictional version who was broken, helpless, incomplete until they arrived. And here's why it matters. If you believe you were a mess before them, then leaving them means returning to that mess. If they saved you, then without them, you're unsavable. The rewritten history becomes a cage made of your own supposed inadequacy. The neuroscience of memory is crucial here. Human memory is not a recording, it's reconstructive. Every time you recall a memory, you're rebuilding it from fragments, and those fragments are susceptible to influence, especially from people you trust. When someone repeatedly tells you a different version of your past, your brain begins to integrate elements of their version into your own. It's called the misinformation effect, extensively studied by memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus. She demonstrated that people can develop entirely false memories simply through suggestion and repetition. If someone tells you, with confidence and consistency, that you were struggling, that you were lost, that you needed rescue, and if they weave that narrative into enough conversations, your brain may start to encode it as true, even if it contradicts your original experience. The identity rewrite doesn't just distort who you are. It erases who you were, leaving you with no baseline to return to. But what if they don't just rewrite your past? What if they script your future, telling you exactly what you're capable of and ensuring you never test those limits? 24. The ceiling installation. You mentioned something you're thinking about trying, a class, a new role at work, a creative project, and before you've even finished the sentence, they're already telling you why it won't work. That's really competitive. I just don't want you to be disappointed. You've never been good at that kind of thing. I mean, you could try, but realistically. They don't say you can't. They say you shouldn't. They frame it as protection, as managing expectations, as saving you from inevitable failure. And maybe they're right, you think. Maybe you're not cut out for it. Maybe you are being unrealistic. Maybe it's better to stay where you are, where it's safe, where you know you won't fail because you're not trying anything new. This is the ceiling installation, and it's the narcissist's way of ensuring you never outgrow the version of yourself they need you to be. They install a ceiling on your potential, not through overt prohibition, but through subtle, persistent doubt. And the ceiling is always just low enough that reaching it feels like success, but never so high that you might discover capabilities they haven't approved. The psychological concept here is fixed mindset, described by psychologist Carol Dweck. People with a fixed mindset believe abilities are static. You're either good at something or you're not. Narcissists cultivate this mindset in their partners because it prevents growth. If you believe you're inherently not a creative person, or not good with people, or not capable of leadership, you'll never challenge those beliefs. You'll self-select out of opportunities before they even arise. Neurologically, this works through a process called neuroplasticity, or rather, the suppression of it. The brain is capable of forming new neural pathways throughout life, developing new skills, adapting to new challenges. But neuroplasticity requires two things: exposure to novel experiences and a belief that growth is possible. The ceiling installation cuts off both. It keeps you from trying new things, and it reinforces the belief that trying would be pointless anyway. Over time, the ceiling becomes invisible. You forget it was installed by someone else. You think it's just the natural limit of who you are. The ceiling installation doesn't tell you what you can't do. It convinces you to never find out. But what if they don't just limit what you think you can achieve? What if they convince you that wanting anything different from what you have is a betrayal of the relationship itself? 25. The loyalty test. You express dissatisfaction, not with them necessarily, maybe with your job, your living situation, the city you're in. You say something like, "I've been thinking about what it would be like to live somewhere else." Or, "I wonder if I should look for a new job. This one is draining me." And instead of curiosity or support, you get suspicion. Are you unhappy with us? I thought you liked it here. I thought we built a life here. If you really wanted to leave, what's stopping you? Suddenly, your expression of general restlessness has been reframed as a referendum on the relationship. Your desire for change has been translated as disloyalty. And now you're backtracking, reassuring, explaining that you didn't mean it like that you're not unhappy with them, that you were just thinking out loud. But the message is clear. Wanting anything different is a betrayal. This is the loyalty test, and it's designed to make you equate contentment with commitment. If you're truly loyal, you won't want to change anything. If you love them, you won't need anything beyond what you already have. Any desire for growth, movement, or evolution becomes evidence that you're pulling away. The psychology here is enmeshment, the collapse of boundaries between two people to the point where individual desires are seen as threats to the relationship. In healthy relationships, partners support each other's individual growth, but narcissists need you to be static, predictable, contained. Your evolution is dangerous because it might take you somewhere they can't follow or control. Dr. Murray Bowen's family systems theory describes this as low differentiation, the inability to maintain a sense of self while in close relationship with others. The narcissist operates from a place of low differentiation and demands the same from you. Your wants must be their wants. Your goals must serve the relationship. Your identity must be subordinate to the we. Neuroscientifically, this creates a conflict between two fundamental human drives: the drive for attachment, bonding, connection, belonging, and the drive for autonomy, growth, exploration, self-determination. Both are mediated by different neurochemical systems: oxytocin for bonding, dopamine for exploration. The loyalty test forces you to choose. You can have connection or you can have growth, but not both. And most people, when forced to choose connection, because the fear of abandonment is more immediate, more visceral than the slow death of unexplored potential. The loyalty test doesn't ask if you love them. It demands that loving them means abandoning yourself. But what happens when loyalty isn't enough? When they need you to not just abandon your own growth, but to actively participate in your own diminishment, to celebrate becoming smaller as if it were freedom. The loyalty test doesn't ask if you love them. It demands that loving them means abandoning yourself. And here's what you need to understand right now before we go any further. The tactics you've seen so far, these first 25, are the foundation, the setup, the groundwork. They controlled your conversations. They rewrote your memories. They eroded your competence and weaponized your vulnerabilities. They isolated you from others and made you question your own sanity. They stole your time and turned your values against you. But all of those tactics were building towards something. Because what comes next? Tactics 26 through 50, these aren't just manipulation techniques. These are the tactics that make you forget there was ever a world before this. The ones that don't just control your present, but colonize your entire sense of what's possible. The ones that make the cage invisible by convincing you that you were never meant to fly in the first place. What comes tomorrow will show you how they make you question whether reality itself can be trusted. How they use time as a weapon in ways you haven't even recognized yet. How they turn your own healing journey into proof of your brokenness. How they make leaving feel not just difficult, but existentially impossible. How they convince you that your suffering is actually sacred, purposeful, destined. The tactics you've learned today have been dismantling you piece by piece. The tactics coming tomorrow will show you how they make you complicit in keeping yourself dismantled. And most importantly, they'll show you exactly how to recognize when you're doing their work for them, even when they're not in the room. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. The most dangerous phase of narcissistic manipulation isn't when they're actively controlling you. It's when you've internalized their voice so completely that you don't need them to manipulate you anymore. You do it yourself, and you don't even realize it's happening. I need you to do something right now before you click away, before you forget, before the fog settles back in. Subscribe to this channel, because tomorrow, when you come back for Tactics 2650, you need to be able to find this. You need this video in your library. You need to know you can return to it when you start doubting what you've learned today. Like this video, not for me, for you, as a bookmark, as a timestamp, as evidence that on this day at this moment you saw clearly, because there will be times, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, when you'll question whether what you saw was real. The like button is your proof. You are here, you recognize something. Share this video. Right now, think of one person, just one, who needs to hear this. Maybe it's someone who's always apologizing for existing. Maybe it's someone who's become a shell of who they used to be. Maybe it's someone who keeps saying it's complicated when you ask how they're doing. Send them this video. Don't wait, don't overthink it, just send it. Because the person who needs this most is probably the person who thinks they're the problem. They're trying so hard to be better, to be worthy, to deserve love. And they have no idea that their goodness is the weapon being used against them. You could be the one who shows them the cage they can't see. Tomorrow, we go deeper. Tomorrow, you'll learn the tactics that don't just hurt you, they make you forget you were ever whole. Tomorrow, you'll see the final architecture of control, the locks on doors you didn't know existed, and the keys you've been holding all along without knowing what they open. Tomorrow, you'll understand why you stayed. Tomorrow, you'll learn how to leave. But only if you come back. Only if you remember. Only if you're ready to see the rest. Tactics 2650 drop tomorrow. Don't face them alone. Subscribe, share, return. Your freedom is waiting on the other side of what you're about to learn. See you tomorrow, and bring someone with you. They need this too.